It was December 13th, 1944. Bing Crosby stood on a frozen stage in the Belgian forest, facing 100,000 soldiers. He was there to lift their spirits, but halfway through White Christmas, something went wrong. The music didn't stop because of a technical glitch. It stopped because Hollywood's most composed star suddenly broke down in front of the entire U.S. Army. Why? Because what Bing saw in that crowd wasn't just an audience. It was a goodbye. And what none of them knew, not Bing, not the generals, not the soldiers crying in the dark, was that in exactly 72 hours, the ground beneath their feet would become the site of the deadliest battle in American history. This is the true story of the night the music died, and the secret pact made in the shadows that would determine who lived and who died. Bing Crosby's hands were shaking as he gripped the frozen wooden railing behind the makeshift stage. It was December 13th, 1944, somewhere deep in the Ardennes forest of Belgium. The air was so cold it felt like inhaling broken glass. In front of him, hidden by the pitch-black darkness of the forest, were 100,000 American soldiers. He couldn't see them all, but he could feel them. A silent, shivering ocean of men waiting in the snow. Behind the curtain, Major Davis, the division commander, looked nervous. He pulled Bing aside. "Mr. Crosby, I have to warn you again. We are less than 5 miles from the German lines. If they start shelling, there is no bunker here for you. We can cancel this. Nobody would blame you." Bing looked at the major, then out at the darkness where thousands of cigarettes glowed like fireflies. "Major," Bing said, his voice unusually low, "these boys are living in hell. If they can stand out there in the freezing mud to hear me sing, I can certainly stand on a wooden box to sing for them." So he stepped out. The roar that greeted him wasn't just applause. It was a release of tension. Years ago, when Pearl Harbor was bombed, Bing had tried to enlist. He wanted to carry a rifle like everyone else. But the government told him no. "You're too old for a trench, Bing," they had said. "And besides, your voice is worth more to the war effort than your aim." For 3 years, that guilt had eaten him alive. While boys young enough to be his sons died on beaches in France and islands in the Pacific, Bing sang into microphones in warm, comfortable studios in Los Angeles. He made millions while they made sacrifices. So when he finally came to Europe, he made one demand to the USO. "Don't put me in the safe zones in Paris or London. Take me to the front. Take me to the boys who haven't seen home in years." This was it, the edge of the world. For the first 40 minutes, Bing was a machine. He did the comedy bits. He sang the upbeat jazz numbers. He joked about the terrible army food. He did everything he could to make them forget, just for an hour, that they were likely going to die soon. And it worked. They laughed. For a moment, the heavy fog of war lifted. But then, as the laughter died down, a silence fell over the forest. Bing was scanning the crowd. The stage lights only illuminated the first few rows. And that's when he saw him. 3rd row center. Kid. He looked impossibly young, maybe 18, 19 at most. His face was smeared with grease and mud, but his eyes were wide, red-rimmed, and fixed on Bing with a desperation that was painful to watch. The kid was gripping something in his left hand. A crumpled, dirty photograph. He was holding it so tight his knuckles were white. Bing paused. He had performed for kings, presidents, and millions of fans. But the look on this kid's face stopped him cold. The soldier wasn't looking at a celebrity. He was looking at a lifeline. Suddenly, a voice shouted from the back, "Bing! Sing it!" Another voice joined in. "Sing White Christmas." The request rippled through the battalion like a wave. "White Christmas! White Christmas!" Bing's stomach dropped. He hated singing that song this close to the holidays. He knew what it did to the men. He knew it was a trigger that broke down the walls they built to survive. But he looked down at the kid in the 3rd row. The kid wasn't shouting. He was just waiting. Bing stepped to the microphone. The wind whipped through the trees. "All right, boys," he said softly. "This one's for you." The moment the melody began, the temperature in the forest seemed to drop even further. "I'm dreaming of a white Christmas." Bing saw it happen immediately. In the third row, the young soldier, Private James O'Connor from Boston, didn't cheer. He didn't smile. He simply closed his eyes, and his body slumped forward. It was as if the song had cut the strings holding him up. A single tear cut a clean path through the mud on his cheek. Then another soldier next to him put his head in his hands. Then another. Within 30 seconds, the sound of weeping began to mix with the wind. It wasn't a gentle cry. It was the sound of thousands of men realizing, all at once, how far away home really was. Where the treetops glisten and children listen. Bing felt his own throat tighten. He looked at Private O'Connor. The kid was looking at the photo in his hand, his shoulders shaking violently. Bing realized something terrifying. These men weren't crying because they were homesick. They were crying because they didn't believe they would ever see that home again. They were mourning their own futures. To hear sleigh bells in the snow, Bing's voice cracked. A raw, unpolished break on the high note. He stopped singing for a second. The silence was deafening. He wanted to walk off. He felt like an intruder in their grief. But then he looked at O'Connor again. The kid looked up. He needed Bing to finish. He needed the promise of the song to be true. So Bing swallowed the lump in his throat and pushed through. May your days be merry and bright. He sang the final lines not as a performer, but as a prayer. And may all your Christmases be white. The song ended. There was no applause at first, just a heavy, sacred silence. Then, Bing did something he had never done in a show. He ignored the stage exit. He walked to the very edge of the wooden planks, crouched down, and signaled to the young soldier in the third row. "You," Bing said, his voice amplified by the microphone but intimate. "Come here, son." The soldiers parted. Private O'Connor, stunned, walked to the edge of the stage. He looked up at Hollywood's biggest star, shivering in his thin uniform. Bing turned off the microphone and leaned down, speaking only to the boy. "What's your name, soldier?" "O'Connor, sir. Private James O'Connor. From Boston." "Who's in the picture, James?" James's hand trembled as he held up the photo. It was creased and water-damaged. A young woman with dark hair and a shy smile. "My girl, Catherine," James whispered. We were supposed to get married last June, but I shipped out." Bing looked at the photo, then at James. He saw the terror in the boy's eyes, the certainty of death. Bing reached down and gripped James's shoulder. His grip was hard, almost painful. "James, look at me." James looked up. "I want you to listen to me very carefully," Bing said, his tone turning serious, almost commanding. "I need you to do a job for me. Sir, you are going to get out of this forest. You hear me? You are going to survive this war. You are going to go back to Boston, you are going to walk into that church, and you are going to marry Catherine." James started to shake his head, tears spilling over. "Mr. Crosby, I don't know if—" "No!" Bing cut him off. "That is an order, son. You marry her. You have a long, happy life. And every Christmas you sing that song for her. Do we have a deal?" James stared at Bing. He was looking for a lie. He was looking for false hope. But Bing's eyes were fierce. "I promise," James whispered. Bing leaned further down and pulled the dirty, muddy soldier into a hug. "You're going to be okay," Bing whispered into his ear. "I'll see you back in the States." Bing stood up and walked off stage. As he reached the dressing tent, he collapsed into a chair and wept. Because he knew something James didn't. He knew the German army was massing just a few miles away. He knew he had just made a promise he had no power to keep. 72 hours later. December 16th, 1944. 5:30 a.m. The silence of the Ardennes forest was shattered not by music, but by the apocalypse. Germany launched the Battle of the Bulge, the largest, deadliest American battle of World War II. 250,000 German troops and thousands of tanks smashed through the exact line where Bing had performed. The forest turned into a slaughterhouse. The American units were caught completely unprepared, outnumbered 5-1. Private James O'Connor's unit was on the front line. Back in Paris, safe in a hotel room, Bing Crosby heard the news. "The Ardennes line has collapsed," the radio announcer said. Bing went pale. He dropped his glass. "My boys," he whispered. "They're killing my boys." For 6 weeks the battle raged. It was a frozen nightmare. Soldiers froze to death in their foxholes. They ran out of ammo. They ran out of food. Bing waited for news. He checked the casualty lists every day. 19,000 Americans killed. 47,000 wounded. He was haunted by the face of the kid from Boston. "I lied to him," Bing told his manager one night, pacing the floor. "I looked him in the eye and told him he'd make it. Who gave me the right to play God?" 8 months after the war ended, Bing was back in Hollywood trying to record a Christmas album. But his heart wasn't in it. Every time he sang White Christmas, he saw the mud. He saw the fear. His secretary walked in with a stack of fan mail. "Mr. Crosby, this one is different. It's marked personal. From Boston." Bing froze. He took the envelope. It was cheap paper. The handwriting was shaky. He opened it. Inside there was a letter and a photograph. It was the picture of Catherine. But it wasn't crumpled anymore. It was framed. "Dear Mr. Crosby, you probably don't remember me. I was the face in the crowd in Belgium, December 44, the night you sang. I'm writing to tell you that I kept my end of the deal. I almost didn't. When the Germans hit us on the 16th, my unit was cut off. We were surrounded for 3 days in the snow. No food. No radio. My sergeant died right next to me. I was so cold I couldn't feel my legs. I lay down in the snow and I wanted to close my eyes and just let it end. It would have been so easy to just let go. But then I heard your voice in my head. Not the singing. I heard what you said to me at the edge of the stage. You are going to marry Catherine. That is an order. It sounds crazy, Mr. Crosby, but I got angry. I thought, I can't die here, I promised Bing Crosby. That promise was the only thing that got me up. It was the only thing that made me pick up my rifle and keep moving. I made it home, sir. And last Saturday, I married Catherine. My brother was my best man. We are the happiest people in Boston. We sang White Christmas at the reception. I cried a little, but they were happy tears this time. You didn't just give us a song that night. You gave me an anchor. You looked at a scared kid and made him believe he had a future. You saved my life. Your friend, James O'Connor. Bing Crosby sat at his desk in Hollywood, holding that letter. The old groaner, the man who rarely showed emotion, put his head on the desk and sobbed. For 30 years, Bing kept that letter in his private drawer. He never read it to the press. He never used it to sell records. It was too sacred, but it changed him. For the rest of his life, whenever he performed White Christmas, whether it was on television specials or in sold-out arenas, Bing would mentally leave the room. He would travel back to that frozen forest in Belgium. He would sing it for James. Years later, a reporter asked Bing, "You've won Oscars, you've sold millions of records. What is your greatest achievement?" Bing didn't talk about his movies. He didn't talk about his awards. He said, "The greatest thing I ever did was show up. Just showing up for someone when the night is darkest. That's all any of us can do." Conclusion. The empty chair. James O'Connor and Catherine stayed married for 54 years. They had 4 children and 12 grandchildren. And every single Christmas Eve, the O'Connor house had a tradition. Before they opened presents, James would put on the record. The crackling sound of Bing's voice would fill the living room. James would sit in his armchair, close his eyes, and drift back to 1944. One year, his grandson noticed something. "Grandpa," the boy asked, "why do you always set an extra place at the dinner table on Christmas Eve?" James smiled, looking at the empty chair at the head of the table. "That's for the man who saved my life," James said softly. "He promised me I'd be here, and I promised him he'd never be forgotten." Bing Crosby didn't stop the bullets. He couldn't stop the war. But on a frozen night in Belgium, he proved that hope is a weapon. He proved that a promise, kept between 2 strangers in the dark, is powerful enough to cheat death. And that is the real meaning of the song. If the story moved you, please consider subscribing. It helps us keep these memories alive. What is the one song that brings you home? Tell us in the comments below.